Hello students and welcome to chapter number 5. In this chapter we will be discussing the process of revision. Last time we talked about the process of writing, and one of the steps in the process of writing was revision, and now there's an entire chapter dedicated solely for revision. That is how important revising your writing is. You always hear this word, style. So this person has this kind of style, this person has a different kind of style. So what is the style of a writer? It is a reflection of their personality. So this is what makes, my writing different from yours. I use different types of words, I use different types of expressions, you use other types of expressions. So it is your unique voice. It sounds like you, even when I don't know who the writer is and I read your essay, there are, certain signals that tell me that this is the writing of Mr. X. This is the style of Mr. X. So it is a way of approaching the audience and the reader. So how you want to convince them of your point? How do you want to communicate what you want to say? Are you going to use, some sort of convincing ways in order to tell them, that they need to believe you? Are you going to use logic? So it depends on how you want to communicate your point. So when it comes to revising our writing, we will be looking into words, sentences, paragraphs, and finally tone, so that we have a comprehensive review process to ensure that our writing is effective and clearly communicates what we want to actually say. So, principles of style. In general, here are some like guiding principles, rules that you need to follow for each and every part that you will be revising. When it comes to words, you need to be clear and concise. Clear, so avoid, any ambiguity. Try to use concrete words. Try to say what you want to say in a specific manner. And also be concise, be brief. You can say the same thing using 3 sentences, or you can use, only one sentence. So as much as you can, try to be concise and brief. When it comes to sentences, use a variety of sentence types. So from your English courses, we have different types of sentences. So using a variety of sentences indicates that you have high levels of English proficiency, and it is also effective when it comes to reaching out to different types of audience. And also use active and passive voice appropriately. So try to come back and forth between these two different voices, but use them in the correct manner. And finally, use parallel structure. So if you use the verb and then like when it comes to sentence structures, so try your best to use this, to follow the same types of structure throughout your writing. When it comes to paragraphs, a good principle is that you need to keep your paragraphs unified and coherent. Coherent meaning that they need to be connected. They, like, when I move from one paragraph to the next, I need to have that sort of perceptualization that yes, what I'm reading actually makes sense. What I'm reading actually is connected to one another. And finally, control paragraph length. Try your best not to have very long extended paragraphs. People are going to get bored. And finally, when it comes to tone, be confident. So write confidently. Don't use certain words and styles that indicate that if you want to believe me, don't exude your confidence through your writing. And then use a courteous and sincere tone, meaning you need to be polite, you need to be respectful, you need to show that you are honest. Then use use emphasis and subordination. So this means that you need to sometimes, to get your point across, you need to emphasize certain parts. So you need to kind of highlight them using big words and drawing the attention of your readers to that particular part. And finally, use positive language and the you attitude. What that means is that, you, through your style and through the tone that you are using throughout your writing piece, you can, convey a positive sort of style where people will be, more motivated to go through the rest of your piece. And when it comes to the you attitude, like, this is involving the reader. Try your best to put yourself in the place of the reader and see, like, what does your paragraph sound like. So we just talked about all of them in general. Now we will be focusing on words. So what exactly do we need to look into while we are revising our writing in terms of the choice of words that we are employing in our writing piece? So we mentioned that the first principle is that you need to write clearly. What that means is that you need to be accurate and complete, so that the words that you are using actually communicate a complete message, actually communicate a correct and an accurate message, so that we understand exactly what it is that you want to say. And then try to use familiar words. So use words that are commonly known to your audience. Instead of using words that are not necessarily very common, this is going to, make your readers a little confused, and they will have to go, search through a dictionary or something in order to understand what it is that you want to say. But when you use familiar words, you avoid all of that. Also use specific concrete language. Remember, in one of the first chapters we talked about abstract versus concrete. So try your best to use concrete, specific language, things that clearly indicate what it is that you are referring to. And the rest of what it means to write clearly is that you need to avoid dangling expressions. We will see what that means later. So dangling expressions. So in the English language, and actually in all languages, you have expressions that, if you translate that sentence literally using a Google translator, for example, it's not going to mean anything. But the expression, altogether actually means a totally different thing. Like, it's raining cats and dogs. Okay. So but what it is that we mean when we say dangling expressions, we will discuss this later. So the last thing here is that you need to avoid cliches, slang, and unnecessary jargon. We have discussed jargon before. We mentioned that this is probably like the technical language that are that are used by a certain group of people or professionals. So if it is, ask yourself that question: if I don't use it, is my message going to be understood or not? If yes, then try to avoid jargon, because this is going to make some of your audience feel left out. Also avoid slang. So slang is kind of a very informal way of saying things. And cliches. Cliches are overly used expressions and words. So things that have been exhausted already, things that people are going to say, oh, so you couldn't find another way to say this. So avoid cliches, slang, and also unnecessary jargon. When you try your best to be as clear as possible in your writing, you are going to have a very effective piece. Here's a practical example of what we mean when we say that you need to write clearly. So look at the second example. So do not, this is an unclear way of saying things, a very complicated way of saying things. The vehicle broke down several times recently. So even though at first glance, this might seem like a very nicely, structured sentence, which it is, but in order to improve it, to further improve it, we can be even more specific. Remember, it's all about clarity. It's all about being specific and concrete. So instead of saying the vehicle, why use such a generic term? Because someone might ask you, which vehicle? Are you talking about the truck? Are you talking about the van? Are you talking about my sedan? Which vehicle, which car are you referring to? So instead of saying the vehicle, you can say the delivery van. And instead of saying several times recently, instead of saying several, just mention exactly how many times. So 3 times. And instead of saying recently, what does recently actually mean? Do you mean recently like in the last couple of months? Do you mean in the last couple of days? But when you say last week, now you are being very specific, and your sentence is conveying a really accurate, mentioning of the events. And here's another example of how can we even be more simple when it comes to our choice of words. So instead of saying things like enumerate, you can say simply list. So this is what we meant when we said that you need to use familiar words, especially to your audience. So in the English language and in most languages, you do have more than one word that mean the same thing. So if you are faced with that situation, then you can never go wrong with choosing the simpler one. Go always with the simpler choice. This is going to make your writing, familiar and approachable and readable to your audience. And when it comes to most specific to least specific, it's a good way to remember this is to use this this analogy. When you are shipping something to someone, when you are sending a package to someone, how do you write their address on the envelope or on the package? You start with the most specific and move to the least specific. If you look at this address in this example right here, you begin with the very most specific thing in the address, and that's the name of the receiver. And then you move to things that are more general. So the job title, the company, the street, and then the country. So you are moving from very specific things to less specific things, and that's kind of the structure that you need to follow in your sentences. So try to remember this address example whenever you are constructing sentences. And it always helps when you try to improve your English proficiency in general by using some of these types of exercises. So one good exercise here is to arrange these terms from most to least specific. From most specific to least specific. So if you look at the first one, you have Western Seaport, Seaport Place, San Diego, and Pier 45. So probably the most specific term over here is Pier 45. This is a particular place, the name of a particular location. And then you try to move from there. So this is the most specific, then try to move to things that are more general. This way you will understand, how the train of how your train of thought works, and how you can arrange the structure of your sentences to make more sense to your readers. Here's another example of a sentence that you can say in a more specific way. So instead of saying the report is very sloppy, so what do you mean exactly when you say sloppy? Is it the style? Is it the words? Is it the formatting? What exactly didn't you like about the report? But when you say something like the report is not well written, then this communicates a message that you have a problem with the with the structure of the report itself, with the writing, with the language of the report, etc. Look at this other sentence. So the vice president was bored by the presentation. So what signals of boredom did the president show? When you use when you use a more specific way to say this, you can you communicate clearly what exactly happened. So the vice president kept yawning and looking at her watch. So instead of saying just bored, you can be more specific to again, it depends on the style of the writer. We're not saying that this is bad or this is good. In certain cases, yes, this could be a more effective, a more proper way of saying things. But again, this is where the style comes into play. So these two sentences communicate the same message, but this is how people are different because of their personality, because of their communication styles, etc. You have certain friends, when they tell a story, they're very very detailed. it's like they're describing each and every event in detail. And other friends who are, very brief and concise when it comes to telling a story. So this is your preference as a writer. How is it that you want to say this? We're just saying here that it is a good principle to always be specific, and especially when it comes to business writing, especially when it comes to, professional organizations. You need to be very specific in what you tell your customers, in what you tell your bosses, and what you tell your employees. So it's always good to be specific. In other types of writing, if you are writing a creative essay, if you're writing a novel, if you're writing a story, then this depends on you. This has to do with your, preferred style. So we go back to our dangling expressions. So basically a dangling expression is when you have two parts of a sentence that do not fit logically together. So basically it makes the meaning unclear, as if, there's something still missing. I don't exactly know what it is that you are saying. So it basically dangles. So the meaning is dangling. It's still missing. It's still unclear. So one of the common types of dangling expressions is when people misplace modifiers and unclear antecedents. So let's go back to our, English language knowledge. So what is a modifier? Modifier it could be a word, it could be a phrase, it could be a clause. I'm hoping you know what we mean by phrase and clause. And these words, phrases, and clauses, they function as an adjective or an adverb to limit or qualify the meaning of another word or a word group. So it's basically like a word or a phrase or a clause that that limit or qualify the meaning of another word or word group. So you use these modifiers in order to, describe what that, what that group of, what those groups of word mean. Then an antecedent is an earlier word, phrase, or clause to which another word refers back. So especially when it follows a relative pronoun. Again, you need to go back to your basics of the English language if you are facing problems understanding what we mean by relative pronouns, clauses, modifiers, etc. Okay, so when we see a couple of examples, I'm hoping things will be a little more clear. So what you need to understand is the following. What is a dangling expression? So we know what an expression is. So a dangling expression is when, the expression is missing something. It's not clear. The meaning is still not 100% correct. So there are, different types of errors, different types of mistakes that people make when they are using expressions. Specifically, or some of the most common mistakes is the incorrect use of modifiers and antecedents. Let's look at the examples now. So before we look at the example, why or what can we, what types of guidelines can we follow in order to improve our use of expressions? We need to make the subject of the sentence the doer of the action expressed in the introductory clause. So you need to emphasize this. So who is doing what? So if you are talking about Khalid, ensure that the sentence clearly shows that Khalid is the one who is doing, the action here. And then move the expression closer to the word that it modifies. So even when it comes to the ordering of the word within the sentence itself, so try your best to have the expression closer to the word that it describes. And then make sure that the specific word to which a pronoun refers is clear. So a pronoun, he, she, or it, you need to ensure that when you say he, she, or it, the receiver of this message clearly knows, what it refers to, what he refers to, so that they know exactly who is the doer of the action here. And then finally, otherwise revise the sentence for coherence. If everything is complete, then just make sure that, altogether the sentence is connected and it clearly communicates a nicely done and an effective message. So here is an example. If you look at this sentence, while smoking a pipe, my cat curled up next to me. So what is wrong with this sentence? So who is smoking the pipe here? Was it you or was it your cat? That's a dangling expression. So we have two parts of a sentence which do not clearly connect to one another. There's still something that is dangling, that is missing. Okay, so instead of saying it like that, be more specific. Again, we go back to the doer of the action. Who is doing what? So while I was smoking a pipe, my cat curled up next to me. Now the expression and now the meaning is complete. Okay? If you look at the next sentence. So climbing the mountain, a rock hit John's head. So who was climbing? Was it the rock or was it John? So we need to be more specific so that the meaning is complete. So while John was climbing the mountain, a rock hit him or hit his head. Okay, or he was hit by a rock. So you need to ensure that the doer of the action is clear. So the doer of the action in this case is John. And what is the action? He was climbing a mountain. So you need to ensure that there's no confusion here. So again, some more examples of how can we be more effective when it comes to using expressions. So instead of saying after reading the proposal, a few problems occurred to me, you can say after reading the proposal, I noted a few problems. Now, how are these two sentences different? While they are both probably grammatically correct, the first one, a few problems occurred to me. So are you still referring to the proposal? Is it a problem with the proposal or is it a different problem? But when you say I noted a few problems after reading the proposal, then we know exactly that there were some issues with the proposal itself. So the second example here, Dr. Lopez gave a presentation on the use of drugs in our auditorium. So why is this a problem? It's not really a problem, but there's a more effective way sometimes of saying things. So Dr. Lopez gave a presentation in our auditorium on the use of drugs. Again, you are being more specific to ensure that the meaning is correctly understood. The first sentence, the use of drugs in our auditorium. So are you saying that the lecture or the presentation happened in the auditorium and the topic was about the use of drugs, or was the topic of the presentation using drugs in the auditorium? You see, that's the problem with the first sentence. But the second sentence is actually very clear. So she gave a presentation where? In the auditorium. About what? About the use of drugs. Instead of saying the use of drugs in our auditorium, then sometimes you can get some confusion because people are going to say, are people actually using drugs in the auditorium? So this is a nice way of, more effective way of avoiding dangling expressions. And a final example, Ming explained the proposal to Joy, but she was not happy with it. What's the problem here? Who was not happy? Was it Ming or was it Joy? They're both ladies, so to which one does she refer to? But when you say Ming explained the proposal to Joy, but Joy was not happy with it, then we know exactly who was not happy here. And here's an exercise for you to do. So how can we fix these modifier problems? So look at the first example. After an hour of sitting, the chairs become uncomfortable. So what's the problem with the meaning here? So who is sitting? Who is sitting on what? So is it the chairs? Are the chairs sitting and they have become uncomfortable? So you need to fix the problem here so that the message and the meaning is complete. And then the second example, distracted by the music, a rabbit ran in front of the car and I hit it. So the problem is, who was distracted by music? Was it you or was it the rabbit? So what do you need to add in order to, make sure that the door of the action is clear and is known to the receiver of the message? And here are a couple of other examples. So what can we do to clarify these pronoun references? So to whom these pronouns are referring to. So bananas seem to have the highest turnover, but the staff is not able to keep up. Most of the time, they run out. Who's they? Is it the staff or is it the bananas? So try to fix this sentence to be more specific so that we know exactly to whom this they, this pronoun, is referring to. And then, although the owners and partners have changed, they continue to expand. Again, who's they? Is it the owners or is it the partners? Okay, so you need to be very specific in order to ensure that your expression is not a dangling one, so that it makes clear and complete meaning. So what is more natural, original language? So instead of saying, it is with great enthusiasm that I am responding to your job advertisement. While this is, a formal way of saying things, it's a good expression, but it doesn't seem really natural. We mentioned before that you need to, ensure that you are using words and styles that really represent you. And the more natural you sound, the more, people are going to be accepting of you. So instead of saying it is with great enthusiasm that I'm responding to the job offer, you can say I'm really happy that I'm, answering your job advertisement. It's as simple and as, straightforward as this. Instead of saying, enclosed, please find the proposal for the schedule for the training session. Again, it's grammatically correct, but it doesn't really say, sound natural, does it? So a more natural way, like how people are going to, say it to one another in a casual way, instead of saying, enclosed, please find the proposal, they're just going to say, I'm just attaching the proposal for our next meeting. It's as simple as that. So throughout your writing, especially in a business context, while people might think that when you use such types of structures, you are going to sound smart and you are going to sound like you know a lot about English, it actually makes people a little, uncomfortable, because you now sound inapproachable. You now sound like someone who is like a professor. So instead of using such expressions and styles, be more natural. I'm not saying use slang, but try your best to use expressions that seem common, that seem familiar. We mentioned that when you use words in your business writing specifically, you need to avoid slang and you need to avoid unnecessary jargon and you need to avoid unfamiliar words and expressions. So avoid also cliche expressions and words, things like synergy. Whenever you tell anyone nowadays in the business world that this achieves synergy, people are just going to be very upset with you, because synergy has been used exhaustively by people in the business world that it has become almost meaningless. So it lost its strength. So instead of using the word synergy, try to express it in a different way. Also avoid unnecessary jargon. So things like COB, close of business. This might mean close of business to you, but if you say this to someone else in a different company, COB might mean a totally different thing. So again, unnecessary jargon. Say close of business. Don't just say COB. And it goes on and on like that. Try to ensure that whenever you are communicating in writing for business purposes, be specific, be respectful, be clear, and also, ensure that you place yourself in the shoes or in the place of the reader and see what that means. If you didn't know what you knew, are you going to understand what it is that you're trying to say or not? And a nice principle is writing concisely. So being brief, being to the point, okay? So in order to write concisely, you need to avoid redundancy. Redundancy is basically, repetition. Is when you say the same thing over and over again. Why say it 2 times when you can say it only once? And also avoiding hidden verbs and subjects. We'll see what that means shortly in an example. So how can we eliminate the redundancy over here? So how can we, avoid repetition? So, signing both copies of the lease is a necessary requirement. So necessary requirement, both basically mean the same thing. You can say it's necessary or is a requirement. You don't have to say it's a necessary requirement because a requirement is by default something that is necessary. And then combine the ingredients together. So you don't need to say together because combining means that you are, joining two things together. So by default, they together is already implied. So you can just suffice by saying combine the ingredients. That's it. And, to eliminate wordiness. So while, grammatically speaking, this is a right sentence, but it is wordy. So you are using a lot of words to say something, when you can eliminate some of the words in order to still say the same thing. So instead of saying, despite the fact that she was feeling ill, she came to the conclusion that she would go to work. So instead of saying despite the fact that she was ill, you can just simply say despite feeling ill. Okay? Although she was ill. And then instead of saying she came to the conclusion that, you can just say she concluded or she decided that she is coming to work. Okay? And another example here is, in my opinion, I think the study of sociology is very fascinating. So how can we eliminate wordiness? So you can, in my opinion and I think. I think already means in my opinion. So you can just say, I think the study of sociology is fascinating. You don't have to even say very, because fascinating means that you are very impressed with it, that you are very interested in it. So I think the study of sociology is fascinating. And, this way you have eliminated wordiness. And now with the hidden verbs. So a hidden verb or nominalization is basically a verb converted into a noun. It often needs an extra verb to make sense. So what exactly do we mean? So in the English language, we have nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, etc. So an example would make things a lot more clear. So instead of saying, please make an application for a personal loan, make an application for a personal loan. This is longer and less clear than saying, please apply for a personal loan. So instead of saying make an application, you can just simply say apply. Okay, so that's what we mean by a hidden verb. Okay, so in order to make things more clear to the person receiving your message, it's always better to show the verb. So here are a couple of examples. So the board came to the realization that it needed to improve its image. So instead of saying came to the realization that, we can just simply say realized. Okay? And nowadays, if you are using Microsoft Word, it has become actually very advanced that it can suggest, improving your sentences in such ways. And the second example, and from now to the rest, to example number 5, this is kind of an exercise for you guys to try. So instead of saying, so now, do you stand in agreement with me? Then the governor asked the legislator. So instead of saying the sentence in this way, what can we do to eliminate wordiness? What can we do to show the verb? Do you stand in agreement with me? Do you agree with me? It's as simple and as straightforward as this, okay? And the rest is for you guys to try on your own. And now, how can we reveal the hidden verbs? We mentioned that you need to show your verb so that your message is understood clearly. So instead of saying a reduction in the price is essential, a reduction in the price is essential, we can just simply say reducing. Reducing, it is essential to reduce the price, or reducing the price is essential. Instead of saying I have made a decision that the product faces elimination, you can simply say I decided. I decided. So there are so many ways, different ways of saying the exact same thing. But the more experience you have and the better understanding you have of the English language and of language in general, maybe you could be communicating using Arabic or other languages, the better you understand the language and the better, the more experience you have, the more, you try writing words and you try writing reports and emails, the better you would become when it comes to making sure that your messages are clear and complete. So to avoid wordiness, as we mentioned, instead of saying things like combine together, you can just suffice by saying combine, because the together is already implied. Instead of saying 11 a.m. in the morning, a.m. already means in the morning, so you can just say 11 a.m. And you have plenty of examples to show what it is that you can do to avoid redundancy or repetition. Expletive. So an expression such as there is or it is that begins a clause or a sentence and for which the pronoun has no antecedent. Okay, so that's what an expletive is. So avoid expletives for clear subjects and better conciseness. What does that mean? So instead of saying there is no indication, there's no indication that it is necessary to include John in the meeting. So you can just simply say that no indication that John should be included in the meeting. Instead of saying there is no indication, instead of saying it is necessary, you can just simply say should be. Okay, so that's what an expletive is. Okay, so using there is or it is in order to basically refer to or begin a sentence or a clause. And here's a nice slide about everything that I would like you to understand about style and how you say different things differently. So here are different ways of saying the exact same thing, but it depends on the type of audience that we are addressing. It depends on what part of the sentence we are emphasizing, and it depends on what we want our audience to focus on more. So we can say, we have different types of, the expressions to say the exact same thing. So we can say using an online recruiting system will increase Alta's number of candidates. So the message here is that if we use this online recruiting system, the result is, the number of candidates is going to increase. So it depends on on the type of audience that we are, addressing. Maybe we want to convince Alta to buy this recruiting system that we are designing. So we are telling them now that if you use our system, this is going to result in increasing the number of candidates. You can say the exact same thing in a different way. So to increase the number of candidates, it is recommended that Alta use an online recruiting system. Now you are focusing on a different part. So maybe instead of focusing on the system itself and the result of the system, you are focusing on the recommendation. You are focusing on, first of all, the result itself. This is what you want, right? To increase the number of the candidates, then I recommend you, or we recommend you, or it is recommended that you use this recruiting system. So it's all about your style. it's all about the purpose. It's all about the type of audience. What it is that you want to emphasize can play a very important role in how you structure your sentence. And this is a nice, segue to the next part of our chapter, and that is revising our sentences. So to write effective sentences, we have mentioned at the beginning of this lecture that some general principles are you need to use a variety of sentence types, okay, instead of using only one type, which is going to make you make you sound very boring actually, and people are not going to be very much interested in what you have to write. And then use active and passive voices appropriately. And finally, use parallel structures. So follow the same structure throughout your paragraphs. So we go back to our English language basics. You have to go back to, understanding, simple clauses, compound and complex sentences. So, a simple type of sentence is when we use only one independent clause. So like this first example right here. So please remember to turn out the lights when you leave. It's only one full complete sentence with only, one independent clause. A compound sentence is when we use two or more independent clauses. So altogether, this is one sentence. Warren started working here in April, and he has already finished his first major proposal. So altogether, this is only one sentence, but it consists of two independent clauses. So the comma here separates the clauses. And then we go back to our simple type of sentence, because here we are only using one independent clause. I don't know why he doesn't remember any of the new employees. Okay, it's as simple as that. It's only one independent clause with full meaning. And finally, we have here a complex type of sentence where we are using, one independent clause and one dependent clause. So without each other, they mean nothing. Okay, so you have to have one in order for the other to have some meaning. So after you left on Friday, so if you be quiet now, it's not, what does that mean? After you left on Friday, okay, what happened? So you have to have this other clause. We decided to move the deadline. So we have an independent clause that has complete meaning. We decided to move the deadline. This is an independent clause, but we also here have a dependent clause, which basically depends on the other clause, so that it has meaning, which is after you left on Friday. So a complex sentence consists of one independent clause and another dependent clause, and the dependent clause means nothing without the other one. So how can we make these active voice? So moving from passive to active, it's, we say that when you are writing, move from, passive to active. So you can, this is a passive voice written sentence. So a full refund on all orders is offered by Old Navy. So instead of saying that, you can just simply say Old Navy offers a full refund on all orders. So you use the the doer of the action first. Use the subject first, and then the second sentence, which is written in passive voice. The books were audited last quarter by this company, by Schumacher and Doer. Okay, so an active voice would be these guys, Schumacher and Doer, audited the books last quarter. So you start with the subject, you start with the doer of the action, and you transform the sentence from being written in passive voice into active voice. Again, these are both grammatically correct, but it has to do with style. It has to do with the audience you are addressing. It has to do with which part you are trying to emphasize. Are you emphasizing the doers of the action? Are you emphasizing the subject, or are you emphasizing the action itself? So it depends on what do you want to emphasize. So we also mentioned that it's a good principle to use parallel structure. What that means is that you need to follow the same way of saying things across your writing. So if you look at the first example here, we used the following food criteria for our restaurant evaluation: taste, variety, and how it was presented. Taste, variety, and how it was presented. Why did we move from using only nouns to, full clauses now? So instead of saying taste, variety, and how it was presented, we can simply say taste, variety, and presentation. As simple as that. So we are using a parallel structure, the same kind of structure across our writing. And then the next example, Gwen will do the following: meet with Mark. After her meeting, give a presentation. She will follow up with accounting. Again, why are we using different structures? So we can say meet with Mark, give a presentation, follow up with accounting. Okay, so we use a parallel, the same structure across our writing. It makes our writing more neat. It makes it more organized. So more examples of how can we use parallel structure across our sentences. So let's just take a look at one over here. So when you are describing an employee, a dispatcher, he is competent and fast worker. While this is correct, in terms of grammar, a more effective way, a better way of presenting this in writing is the new dispatcher is competent and fast. You don't need, you have already used an adjective. You have already used competent, so just use adjective again when you are referring to the same person. So that is what we mean by using parallel structures. So the agenda, remember we have encountered this term before when we are writing our minutes of meeting, right? When we are preparing for a meeting, we need to prepare our agenda. So instead of saying, instead of our agenda items, instead of having them written in a more scattered way like this. So what is independent research? Cost of so one time you are using a question, another time you are using only one word, and then in the third point you are using a different type of sentence. The better way of presenting your agenda is when you use the same type of method, the same type of style, the same type of structure when you are writing each and every agenda item. So if you may, you can put them all in question form. So what is independent research? What are the costs of conducting independent research, and so on. Okay, so this is how parallel structure makes everything looks, more neat and better organized. And then we move on to our third item in this chapter, and that is revising our fully developed paragraphs. So to revise our paragraphs, we need to understand that there are certain elements that we need to look for when we are writing our paragraphs. We need to ensure that our paragraphs have unity. So they are united across the entire essay or across the entire report. That they are coherent. That they have coherence, so they are connected. They all together they mean something. They are logical. And also we need to take note of our paragraph length. We need to ensure that our paragraphs are of an appropriate length. That they're not too long, they're not too short, that we don't have one paragraph that is particularly long and another that is particularly short. So we need to have some sort of consistency across our paragraphs for our entire piece. So how to write a unified and coherent paragraph. So a paragraph that is connected, a paragraph that is strong. So we need to read all of the sentences on the next slide and delete the one that does not belong to the unified topic of the paragraph. So when you are developing paragraphs, when you are in the process of writing paragraphs, when you are now you're revising it. So you need to read what's before, in, and after. So I'm reading paragraph number 3. So I cannot revise paragraph number 3 in isolation of the paragraphs before and after it. So I need to read paragraph number 1. Then I see how it transitions to paragraph number 2, and how it moves to paragraph number 3, and then how paragraph number 3 introduces me to paragraph number 4. So this is why we need to read what's before the paragraph and what's after the paragraph to ensure that there's a logical flow of information, so to ensure that we're not confusing our readers. If we need to, we can rearrange the sentences in a logical order so that they flow appropriately, so that when I transition from paragraph number 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, it actually makes sense now. Okay, so I talked about this topic first, and now I'm giving you more details about it, and now I'm shifting or moving to another topic, and so on. We use transitions, repetitions, and pronouns to cement this structure and make it seem natural. So cement, so we are trying our best to, remember we said, parallel structure. So as much as possible, try to use the same kind of expressions, the same way of presenting your information across your entire writing piece. So we use transition words, first, second, similarly, then, now, although, all of those types of words, so that it makes our thoughts more organized, and that our readers, our audience, really understand what it is that we're trying to convey. So here's an exercise that you can go through in order to see, how can we put together a paragraph in a coherent and united way. So if you want, you can pause the video and read through these sentences and try to rearrange them so that they now make a logical flow of information. Okay, so these sentences from 1 to 5 are not in order. So pause the video and try to rearrange them. And then when you're done, resume the video, and you will see the answer in the next slide. So here is your answer. Okay, so here are the sentences, and they are put now in an orderly fashion. So now the paragraph actually now makes sense. So the information is now logical. We started about a warning note, that cacao beans are threatened by disease, and what is that disease, where is it coming from, how is it imported, and so on. We mentioned that we need to use transitional words and expressions in our writing to ensure that the flow of sentences is clear and appropriate. So if we want to show addition, we use expressions and words like also, besides, furthermore, and so on. If we want to show cause and effect, we would use words like therefore, as a result. Okay, if we want to show contrast, so when we are saying that this is different from that, so we can use things like however, we can use things like but, we can use things like on the other hand, and so on. So again, to be a better writer, you need to go back to basics, and you need to freshen up on your English grammar, and ensure that you go back and revisit some of your English composition books to freshen up on your vocabulary, freshen up on your what we mean by clauses and phrases, independent ones, dependent ones, how can we use transitional words, and so on. And the last thing in our process of revision, and that is tone. So basically, how do we come across through our writing? This is tone. So to convey an appropriate tone, as we mentioned in the beginning of the lecture, we need to be confident, we need to be sincere and courteous, we need to be positive. So how can all of that be done in practice? So to sound more confident through your writing, avoid saying things like, if you would like to take advantage of this offer, if you would like, if you please, may, want, try to avoid using these types of expressions. We are not talking about conversations. This is writing. So in writing, you need to be straightforward. So instead of saying things like that, just tell them straightforwardly to take advantage of the offer, just call me. Okay? In an email, for example. And then instead of saying that, I hope that you will agree with me that my, qualifications match your job requirements. Now you yourself sound like you don't have faith in in your own skills. So instead of saying that, just be very straightforward. Be very, confident about yourself in the way you present yourself through writing. My qualifications match your job requirements in the following ways, for example. Okay, instead of saying, I hope that you maybe you will agree with me that now you sound, hesitant. You sound like you don't really have, believe in your own self. So again, remember, this is writing. This is not conversation. In conversation, maybe things will be a little different because you want to come across as, humble, as someone who is not really arrogant. But in writing, you need to be clear, you need to be specific, you need to be straightforward. So using a courteous and sincere tone. Okay? So we are being respectful here, and we are being honest, and we are being, using certain ways to say things to come across as people who care. So instead of saying things like, companies like ours cannot survive unless our customers pay their bills on time. So instead of saying things in a very harsh way like that, you can say, by paying your bill before May 30, you will maintain your excellent credit history with our firm. We are saying exactly the same thing, but in a more polite, in a more respectful way. Okay? Still coming across as confident instead of sounding weak. So instead of saying, you sent your complaint to the wrong department, we don't handle shipping problems, you don't say things like that to a customer. You have to be courteous, you have to be polite, you have to be respectful. So you can say, you or we have, so shift the blame from the customer to yourself. This way you sound a little more, caring. So we have forwarded your letter to the shipping department. You should be hearing from them within a week. It's a more respectful way to, to talk to your customers, and this way they will appreciate you even more. So here's an email that you need to revise for a you attitude and positive language. So positive language meaning, avoid using negative words. If, you can say the same thing using positive tone or a negative tone. So it's always better. It's always, more preferable by the readers to receive messages in a more positive way. So instead of saying things like this, like, unfortunately, we cannot accept party reservations until March 15. Okay, change it to something more positive. Things like, we are happy to say that we will be able to, receive your reservations by March 15. So you are, saying the same thing. You are communicating the same information, but in the first one, you are being negative that, oh, I'm sorry, but we cannot do this. Oh, wow. But in the other way, you are saying that, this is actually happy news, that by March 15, we will be able to take you on as as customers. And also when it comes to the you attitude, so instead of, always saying things like, in the we type of pronoun. So things like, we will be ready to have you. You can say, you will be able to make reservations on March 15. Okay, so it has to do with including the readers, including the people who are receiving this message. So try to rewrite this email in a more positive way, and by also using the you attitude. We mentioned at the beginning of the chapter that we have something in the English language, and actually in all languages, called a cliche. So cliches basically start with a remark that ends up with becoming very well known. So it has become so commonly known by everyone that, it doesn't indicate that you have, uh, you know, a rich vocabulary to say things. So when you use a cliche, you are, looked at as, you are considered as someone who is not necessarily well versed in the language, or who has, competence in writing professionally. So avoid using cliches. Okay, these are very popular expressions. So things like, as old as the hills. Try to avoid things like this, especially remember, we are talking about business writing. You should always be professional in your selection of words and expressions. Things like brave as a lion. You are trying to describe someone who is very brave. So just say this person is brave instead of saying brave as a lion. And we have, a lot of other examples of cliches, things like frightened to death, things like every cloud has a silver lining. So again, you are not writing a novel, you are not writing for a creative writing class. This is business writing. So avoid cliches, avoid unfamiliar words, avoid, unnecessary jargon. So as much as possible, be specific, be concise, be professional, and also be respectful, be polite in the way you write things, to your customers, to your colleagues, to your superiors, your bosses, etc. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next chapter.